When we think about online learning, it's almost as if online learning is solitary both by nature and design. If we take a look at a lot of the images used to market online programs, we usually see students in a solitary situation, on their couch with a computer in their lap, sitting in a field with a laptop, in a coffee shop with a laptop. But this solitary nature also backfires to a certain extent. If we take a look at retention and persistence numbers in online environments, if we think back especially to the MOOC phenomenon several years ago, we see high attrition rates and low completion. In other words, you have a lot of students who are dropping out, and those who actually stay may not complete the class. According to Ritchie in 2016, these numbers were sometimes as low as 4 to 7%. So my research was looking at the effect of a commercial chat app on student feelings of belongingness and connectedness to an online computer college literacy course. I took a look at an app called Voxer to see if it created a shared social space that increased feelings of belongingness and connectedness in the online space that we usually see with students in the traditional classroom, where students come in, students can interact with each other. Either you're sitting next to a neighbor, you have someone sitting across from you, you have someone sitting behind you. Obviously, we have the instructor at the very front of the classroom, or at least somewhere present in the learning environment. Obviously, when we're in a distance learning situation, we don't have this. Depending on who the instructor is, the instructor may contact students a handful of times over the course of the class. They may get the obligatory welcome email. They may get an occasional reminder about upcoming exams, and they may get an email at the end of the semester. Student interactions, if there are any at all, may be limited to things like chat boards, and the chat boards may have a forced communication network. So in other words, a student has to post a seed entry and then enter 1, 2, 3, or 4 replies, which kind of takes away from the organic nature of interaction and kind of turns it into more of a script. So current research basically says that when students feel a social connection to their peers, they have a sense of belongingness and inclusion with the community. In other words, even in an online environment, when students feel like they are a member of the community, when they're a member of the class, they're more likely to persist and to complete. In other words, the organic human interface almost becomes a sort of safety net when online students get in the position where they're considering dropping. Obviously, if you feel like you were included with something, if you feel like you belong to something, you are far less likely to leave it. Whereas if you're just kind of sitting out there on your own and you really don't have any tethers or connections to that environment. Now, a lot of this research is driven by Garrison's community of inquiry model, and one of the big tent poles in the community of inquiry model is this idea of social presence. That is to say, even in the online environment, if learners feel as if there are other learners out there, if learners feel as if there's an instructor out there, that creates these organic bonds, even in the online environment. So we have this idea of a human touch that is critical in creating human connection and ultimately human belongingness in these online learning spaces. So the purpose of my study was to determine if the inclusion of a chat app called Voxer had any influence on students' perceptions of belongingness or community in an online computer college literacy class. Just to give you some background information, Voxer is a free application that you can download for mobile devices. There's also a desktop interface, and it allows a lot of flexible communication options. Obviously, it has traditional text-based options where you can either type in or have a application like Siri transcribe. It gives the ability for video communication, for voice communication, even image communication and animated GIFs. So the setting for the study was a large multi-campus community college in the southeastern United States. The last census data showed it serving about 29,000 degree-seeking students in the 2014 to 2015 academic year. Of that population, 55.53% of the students were female, 47.47% were male. The average age for females was 29. The average age for males was 27. 51.2% of the students were white. 26.7% of the students were black. 10% were Hispanic. 4.8% were Asian, and 7.3% were categorized either as other or they did not report their race. The class in question is an intermediate level computer literacy class. There are no prerequisites or other barriers to entry. So traditionally, the average participant in this class is a first semester student, simply because it's one of the classes that they have a very good shot of getting into, because there's nothing stopping them from getting in. Obviously in community colleges, you may have some classes that have barriers like a writing prerequisites or writing proficiency, a math proficiency, a reading proficiency. This particular class doesn't have any of those barriers to entry, so usually your typical student is a first semester student, simply because it's very easy for them to get in. The content is delivered via a commercial content management system, and the actual course content is delivered via a vendor's learning management system. Students choose any section that they wish. Traditionally, there are anywhere from 7 to 10 sections of this class offered online. Students can choose any. There are none that are restricted for various reasons. In this particular case, there were about 30 students who participated in the online portion of the study, and they were respective of the college demographics. So the collaborator that I was working with was a community college administrator, has a terminal degree, and over a decade of experience in his administrative role. We were working in particular because this class has one of the highest attrition rates, highest non-complete rates, and the grades tend to trend a little low under the average. One of the reasons why I kind of thought about this was, having taught this class, I have seen where other instructors won't really interact with the classes. They'll send out, as I said earlier, the occasional email. There really won't be a lot of interactions. And what I wanted to see was if going a little more assertive in terms of creating a student environment where students could interact with each other, even in the online class, they would, to see if that had any influence on the attrition numbers for the particular class that I was teaching. So basically what I did for the experiment was I had 2 sections of this class. I had one section that I was teaching online. I had one section that I was teaching in a classroom 2 days a week for 1 hour and 50 minutes per session over the course of a 16-week term. What I did was I deployed Voxer exclusively in my online section the first week of class. One of their assignments was to download Voxer, to create an account, to join the Voxer chat room that I had created for our class, and to look in on the class. I didn't make participation a weekly assignment, but students knew that they were expected to check in on a regular basis, at least see what was going on. Now, while that was going on, obviously I had my seated face-to-face classroom where students met twice a week for 1 hour and 50 minutes. and they had the opportunities to interact with each other. So, again, we're talking about a classroom that has about 30 computer terminals all set up in rows. So students would cluster together, and as the semester went on and on and on, as you usually see in an online class, students begin to form bonds, they begin to form a social community. So what I decided to do was basically run a survey towards the end of week 12 in the semester, and basically what I did was I ran a survey where I had students use a 5-point Likert scale where each population rated their particular feelings about belongingness, connectivity, inclusion in the classroom environment, and then kind of pulled the data down. I asked the online students a few additional questions about their thoughts and perceptions on Voxer as a tool. So by the time data collection was done, what I had were 2 sections where really the only variable was the use of Voxer. Same class, same curriculum, same format, same instructor. So the only thing that was really separating the two was you had the seated classroom who met 2 days a week, hour and 50 minutes. They had the opportunity to create a community, to create this feeling of belongingness and connectedness, not only with each other, but to their instructor, because they saw me obviously for each lecture. Whereas I had the online class who were really only knit together with the Voxer chat room. So when we pulled the data back and kind of took a look at the questions, what I did was I took the positive trending Likert questions, grouped them together, the neutral questions stayed on their own, and the negative trending Likert questions, I grouped them together, if only because one students strongly agree, maybe another students agree. However, both are positive responses. If we're taking a look at a couple of the questions, by and large, the responses were almost equal, not quite numerically equal. In other words, you didn't see a numeric correlation right down to the decimal point, but the trends, for the most part, seem to be on par. In other words, with one real exception, the students in the online section had the same values, opinions, and beliefs about belongingness and inclusion that their seated peers had. The one question that really was kind of skewed a little bit was question 1. I feel a personal connection with students in my class. In the seated section, the aggregation of positive responses came out to about 73%. The online section had an aggregation of about 61%. And I think part of that comes to the fact that in the free response section, several of the online students kind of spoke to the fact that they really didn't want to interact with other people. They kind of wanted their own space where they could do their own thing, and sort of begrudgingly accepted Voxer and the social environment as part of it. The second question, I feel like I can easily communicate with my peers. If we take a look at the numbers there, the seated section comes out to about 80%, and the online section actually comes out to about 94%. And again, I think that the presence of Voxer really influenced those online numbers, because those online students knew that it was there. I think the seated section, they take it for granted that there are going to be other students there. They take it for granted that if they turn to the person next to them and ask for help, or if they raise their hand in the classroom, they know that there's automatically going to be a teacher there. But in the online classroom, they don't know if anybody is necessarily out there. However, because they had Voxer, and because they knew that Voxer was out there, and because they knew that I checked Voxer multiple times on a daily basis, they knew that communication was built in to that part of the class. So I think that's why we tend to see a stronger skewing on that particular question. For question 3, if we take a look, there is a percentage-wise numerical correlation. 66.67% of both populations, seated and online, said that they felt a common bond with their classmates. If we take a look at question number 4, we can see that the seated section actually skews a little numerically higher than the online section. The question is, I feel like my classroom is a community of peers. Again, I think the fact that we kind of had some lone wolves out there in the online class who probably chose the online class because they probably didn't want a lot of human interactions. They didn't necessarily want to interact with their peers. I think that kind of influenced that particular perception. Question 5 was designed to gauge the instructional social presence. In other words, the social presence of the instructor in the classroom environment. I feel like I know my instructor's personality. If we take a look at that, about 80% on the seated population came in the agree, and 94.5% came in on the online population. And again, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that in the online population, they knew that they had Voxer as a tool. We had multiple interactions, both myself to the group and student to instructor interactions within the Voxer group. So they definitely saw me there. They definitely knew that I was there, and they were aware of that instructor's social presence, probably a lot more than in the seated section. Again, I think in the seated section, a lot of students tend to take those social interactions for granted. Again, taking a look at the next question, I feel like my instructor cares about me. We see pretty much a correlation between the two. 80% in the seated section responded in the positive, and 83.3% in the online students responded in the positive. So again, we can see the influence of instructor social presence, the fact that in both populations, I was present enough to the point where the students could feel an emotional bond, and they knew that there was care and there was concern. Question 7 was one of the questions given to the online students. How often do you check Voxer? And if we take a look, there's definitely a distribution. You can see that about 22% of the student population checks it several times per day, but also 6% of the population, that would be one of the students, basically signed on, got the assignment, and didn't check it at all. If we take a look, 16.67 at least checked it once per day. 43% of the class checked 2 to 4 times a week, and we had 16.67 that checked in once a week or longer. So a majority of the students were at least checking in several times per week in the Voxer group to at least see what was going on, if not interact. Now, while students were checking, not nearly as many were actually interacting within the space. So if we take a look at question number 8, how often do you use Voxer to communicate with your peers or instructor? We only had 27.7 who were actually going in on a regular basis and interacting with the group. That was one of the trends reflected in the free response questions that came at the end of the survey. You had about half of the class that interacted less than once per week, 16.67 interacted less than once per month, and again, we have that one student out there, it may not be the same, but that 6.25, that doesn't interact at all. So looking at the results for question number 9, how do you feel about the social climate in your classroom and your ability to connect with and engage your peers? If we take a look at the positives they almost match up. In the seated section, 80% of the students had a positive belief on that. In the online section, 83.3% had a positive belief on that. So that's really kind of where I'm coming to my conclusion that Voxer did play a role in the belongingness and inclusion in the online environment, because you had 83% of the students in that online section who had a positive response to a question about the social climate and their ability to connect with and engage their peers. This is also reflected in question number 10. This was a question given only to the online group. How do you feel about the use of Voxer as part of the class? Again, 83.3% of the students had a positive perception about the use of Voxer in the class. 11% had a neutral perception about the use of Voxer, and 5.5 had a negative perception on the use of Voxer. I think that if we take a look at Voxer, the biggest challenge that I had in deploying it was this theme of student reluctance at the beginning. In other words, Kind of like we've probably seen in all of our classrooms, really life in general. If you're presenting students with something that's new, something that they're not used to, there's going to be a certain degree of reluctance and apprehension, and they kind of need a little winning over. But once they were won over, like we saw with those numbers, a majority saw Voxer as a positive tool that really created a positive and affirming learning space. And in particular, I want to pull one of the quotes from the free response section. A student replies, "Initially, I thought Voxer was going to be a huge waste of time, and I think it is asking a little much of students to download an app specifically for one class. Also, the only real downfall of having Voxer is that you get messages whenever anyone sends them, so I had to turn the notifications off so I wouldn't hear the dinging all night. Overall, Voxer has been great, and the instant communication with others is definitely worth having the app. It gives you instant access to all the classmates and the instructor, so you can ask simple questions or more complex questions." So if we go back and we take a look at the data, it seems that Voxer did have a positive influence on students' sense of belongingness, students' sense of inclusion, and students' sense of connectedness to one another within the online classroom. So now the question would be to see if we can replicate this, to see if other instructors who are using Voxer in kind of a similar controlled situation, where maybe they have an online class and they have a seated class and they're using the Voxer exclusively in that online class as a way of enhancing the belongingness and connectedness, as a way of pushing persistence and completion as part of that class. What I can say in closing is this particular online class that I have began with 40 students, and I have only lost, in this semester where I've been using Voxer, I've only lost 4 students. I've had 4 withdrawals. I'm making this video on November 29th. We are about a week and a half away from the end of the semester, so at this point in time, the students who are on the roster are going to at least finish the class. In the past, losing 4 students for an online class is almost unheard of. So usually in this class, attrition tends to range in the high single digits to the low teens. It's very common to lose anywhere from 20 to 30% of students in an online session for this particular class. So I do believe, to kind of bring this together and close this up, I do believe that Voxer did have a positive influence, and I do think this is worth pursuing in future research. Thank you.
Nope. I figured it out. Skadoosh.